Well, welcome to another episode of the Peak Potential Success Show. My name is Fong. I'm an entrepreneur, business strategist, real estate investor, speaker, and also best-selling author. And every single day, I help others unlock the potentials and guide them to succeed. Today on the show, we have another fascinating guest. On the show, we interview celebrities, entrepreneurs, business CEOs, multimillionaires, athletes, and artists to find out their path to success, how they're able to overcome challenges and adversity, and of course, their keys to success. And today's guest is definitely somebody who could add to that story, add to that topic because she is very, very good at what she does. She's been able to train a lot of great leaders. She herself is an amazing leader. I've had a great time and the opportunity to hear her speak a few times. And every single time she speaks, everybody listens because her energy. She walks in, completely brightens the room, lightens up the mood, and whether it's her amazing content or her energy or her throwing in a song, a dance, or some type of entertainment there, people are so fascinating as to what she's going to be talking about. She helps her clients accelerate their careers. She's a person who helps them become thriving leaders and also up-leveling their leadership of self and others as well. She is the co-founder of Speaking Prowess and the CEO of Transform Your Performance with a Passion for Dance. So please welcome author, transformational leadership coach, international inspirational speaker, Ms. Regina Huber.
Thank you so much for having me on, Fong. Well, no pressure after all you said about me.
Well, thank you very
I
much
am
for being
delighted
here.
to be here.
It's awesome having you here. Like I said, every time I hear you speak, every time I see you, everything brightens. You have this great energy, and I'm very, very excited. Now, I know you're from the other side of the globe right now. So once again, thanks for being here at this time. Uh, how did you get to who you are today? Like you're this great leader. You help lots of people become great leaders. Were you born as a leader?
I was certainly the first of five siblings, so maybe that makes me a leader at birth. I don't know. I grew up in a little village in Germany, in Bavaria, and I was literally the shyest kid in the village. But I also was always extremely curious, Fong. And so this is what I think inspired my urge to travel and to explore the world and to live in other countries and continents. And that's how I've eventually lived in 7 countries on 4 continents and worked on 5. And it's this constant discovery that that my life has been so far. I have a very eclectic background. So I moved to Spain at 26 when I was working at a global consulting firm. And 10 months later, I was offered a leadership position without any relevant background, really. And I eventually ended up spending 16 years total at that firm in several different locations in Europe, in the US, in Latin America. I opened 2 offices for them in Portugal and Brazil. And and later I decided to take a different route, and I opened businesses in Argentina and Brazil before this current business that I have now, or I should say now 2, because we just are launching Speaking Prowess as well, together with a collaborator in New York, that is Asifo Rafael. And my other business, I started in 2012 when I moved to New York City at the beginning of 2012, and that's when it all started to evolve. So I've taken a ton of risks in my life, and as a result, I've also been presented with a lot of opportunities for growth, as we call them sometimes. Definitely have a lot of stories, lots of adventure, many wins, some very big losses. But again, losses become wins in the shape of lessons when we use them as such, right? So gladly, I also studied a lot of holistic healing, which helped me move through some of those challenges a bit more smoothly and easily, and also taught me a lot about mindset, the subconscious mind specifically, energy, as you mentioned. And energy is also something that I learned about in dance, because as I was moving from country to country, I've always tried to pick up some of the dance that was prevalent locally, like, in Brazil, in Argentina, of course, and in Spain and other places. And eventually I wanted to put all that eclectic experience that I had accumulated over the years in those different locations into something meaningful. And I had this multicultural experience on several continents, and I figured that there was something there that I could use to make a difference in other people's lives, working with them. And that's how Transform Your Performance was born, really. So now, as you said before, I mostly work with leaders in corporate and in financial services and so on, in tech, to help them advance faster, to get promotions, become better leaders and all of that, but also some business owners who have teams.
That is absolutely amazing. So much stuff that I can pick out to really dive deep into. One of the first things that you said was that you went into corporate and then you were put into a leadership position with not much leadership training to begin with. Why
None.
is that? Is there something that you were able to provide that if people did do training, were not able to provide that made you stand out so that you were picked out to be, hey, we want you to be in this leadership position?
Yeah, I can only guess about this because I really never asked the question at the time. However, I had just moved to Spain from Munich, and I just learned Spanish. And 10 months later, I was offered this position. So I still had to go through the hiring process, through the, not hiring in that case because I was already hired, but through the application process for this particular position. But this lady who I actually reported to left, as she was about to leave the firm. And so there was this opening. And there were some external candidates as well who were also in the run together with me. But eventually I got the role and was thrown into the cold water a little bit. And I believe that it was because I took a lot of initiative. I think that's what it was, because I always made suggestions about how to improve things, how to improve systems, structures, how to improve, for example, also the evaluation process, the review process, etc. So I think this was the main reason, actually.
What do you think was the biggest shocker to you when you were put in that position and you're kind of, okay, I have to learn how to fly very fast here or else I'm going to lose this spot. So what was the biggest shocker for you when you were in that position?
Well, I don't know if it was a shocker, but the biggest challenge I would say was really that there were all these other people who were now my staff, my team, and it was a pretty big team. Some of them were quite a bit older than me, more senior. Some of them could have maybe also wanted to be in that role to have that opportunity, and they didn't get it. So I was a little bit afraid that there would be competition and that it would get a little ugly in that sense potentially, but it didn't. It was really beautiful that it didn't happen. So I think of course, it would have been easier if I had known more at the time, you know. However, I am somebody who usually learns by doing. Yes, I've studied a lot of things for sure, but also have learned most of what I know now at my 60 years old by doing and by traveling, by exploring, by discovering. And I think this is some of the most precious wisdom that we can attain.
Mhm.
And it comes through our own experiences, our own, risks sometimes. As I said earlier, I've taken a lot of risks, and some worked out and some didn't, and that's okay. And at the time, uh, I just really try to do my best. I try to be there. And one thing that helped me also is I was never really, I hadn't grown up making differences because of status.
Right.
So I think that really helped me because I was treating everybody the same way.
Mhm. Now, you mentioned before that you were shy to begin with as well. And
Mhm.
there's a lot of people out there who goes, well, I'm shy, I'm introvert, therefore being a leader is never going to be in my future. What do you say to those people who wants to be a leader but is somewhat shy and introverted?
Well, I was so shy as a kid, I would lock myself up in my room to not have to go to kindergarten together with my brother. We would lock ourselves up and then we would not get out until we received a gift to lure us out. But here's the thing, I'm actually an ambivert, but you can also be shy as an extrovert. You know, it's not exactly the same. It's some shyness is more like a certain type of insecurity. You're just not confident enough. And sometimes we need to learn this confidence. What can help us are tools, techniques, tips, like the ones that I put together in my book, Speak Up, Stand Out, and Shine. Because when I arrived in New York City, I did not have a network. I had two businesses in Argentina and Brazil, but they were completely different. They were brick and mortar businesses. I had no idea about what it implied to build this business at the time, none at all. And I had just come back from speaking Spanish and Portuguese for 7 years and had to build a brand new network after my confidence was completely destroyed at the time because I had lost my business eventually to a fraudulent business partner in Brazil. So my self-esteem was below zero at the time. And I had to rebuild it from scratch. And that's when I came up with some of the exercises that I later put into that book. So you can actually do it even when you're in that situation. So I had built up my confidence. I'd had that opportunity over the years by traveling, moving, and always by myself, really. However, it had been destroyed again, and I had to rebuild it from scratch again.
Mm-hmm.
And you can do it. You know, it's you probably are not even starting at the low level I was restarting at. Most people aren't starting at that level. They are much higher.
Mm-hmm. How do you rebuild that? Like when a person's confidence is low,
Mm-hmm.
it takes a lot to bring that back up again. You seem to say it's something that you can rebuild like on spur of moment. How do you do it?
So it's a process. It's not from one moment to the next. However, when you have some tools, I call them crutches sometimes, you know, we need some crutches to prop ourselves up when we're challenged. And in those situations, we want those tools. We want to have something simple that we can use to just really feel better in the moment. Just like Amy Cuddy talks about power posing in her TED Talk, right? But there are many other things we can do. I like to play with energy, with that inner power energy that we have. For example, we can do visualizations, imagining ourselves being successful in a specific situation. There's so much we can do. Simple breathing exercises can help, right? And a lot of people talk about breathing too. But rebuilding or building up this confidence is a process. It takes a little while. Of course, as speakers, practicing helps a lot, you know, or as presenters, if you are, for example, an employee and they have to present to your leadership team, well, practice. You probably are already competent, you know your stuff, but what we don't get so much training in usually is in doing presentations or speaking, or get somebody to help you, like Fong, right? To a coach who can help you. A lot of it is about mindset. So we can also get rid of those self-limiting beliefs. We can do some very deep subconscious work, which I have been doing forever since I ever studied holistic healing modalities, because they are really, when they're truly holistic, they take everything into account, especially our beliefs, our mindset, and of course also our energy, our body, everything really. But we can use those methodologies or modalities to do this and go deep with subconscious beliefs and then release them and get rid of them. There's also hypnosis, for example. Not everybody likes everything. I know, I'm just giving options, right? And so it's I do this work with my clients too, depending on what they need. It's customized one-on-one coaching for the most part. But we really go deep with things that need a deep dive.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I believe that simple things like making lists about your unique brilliance. I have my clients craft lists of they're what I call unique assets, because we all have this unique brilliance, this genius inside of us. And sometimes we don't own it because we don't even know exactly what it is. So really do this, journal on what makes you brilliant, what makes you stand out, because there's a reason why we all have different DNA and why we're all different. And you are you, and nobody can be like you.
Wow. I like the way you talked about if you're a person who's working at a corporate scenario and you want to stand out, you should be practicing giving presentations, practicing speaking. Now, I have clients or people come and ask me, hey, I'm in this situation where I'm do calculations, I work at this job, I want to stand out, but I'm not put in a position where I get to speak. So
Mhm.
for those people, how do they stand out?
Well, I suggest to my clients to actively look for high visibility activities or tasks, because these also help people get promoted more easily. Productivity doesn't get you promoted. High positive visibility does.
Mhm.
So you want to look for those. You could be, for example, on a panel, or maybe speaking isn't your thing, and maybe it's writing. Maybe you can write an article about your specific area that you're an expert in. Maybe you can share something during a meeting. You don't always have to be asked. You can sometimes also suggest to do that. Or you could volunteer to moderate a meeting, puts you automatically in the spotlight.
Yeah.
These are just a few things. But I think, and networking, of course, too, strategic networking. Meet the people you need to meet, the decision makers. Have conversations with them if possible.
Now, you're also a person who's well traveled. You lived in so many different countries, you worked in so many different countries, and you've worked with different leaders in so many
Mhm.
different countries. What have you found to be some of the differences between leadership strategies from one country to another? Or are they pretty much global all around?
Well, I think the success strategies are pretty much the same. However, we do work with sometimes more traditional or less traditional environments. Yes. So sometimes also more hierarchical or less hierarchical, depending on both the country and the organization. I worked at the Boston Consulting Group, but there were differences between the different offices, although it's known to be a relatively flat hierarchy. It's not always perceived like that by the people who work there, depending on where they are in which office. And also, of course, depending on their own perception, right? But I believe that, there's external authority and there's inner authority. And what we really want is inner authority. That's the type of authority that you don't need to constantly talk about. You don't need to affirm by being authoritarian, in that negative sense. Inner authority is related to authenticity. And I think, I really love to work with value-driven leaders. I love to work with bold leaders who dare to stand up for what's right, also when it goes against mainstream, who don't just play along with everything, but who speak up. And I believe that in the long run, sometimes that's hard, challenging. You might not be successful immediately when you work in a challenging environment where it's not well regarded. However, I believe in the long run, that's what gives leaders the fulfillment and the more sustainable success.
Wow. Again, you've been all around the world, and you just mentioned before that you've learned Spanish in like 10 months or a short period of time, and you've learned multiple languages. Is there a secret as to how people can pick up languages quicker?
I think one thing that certainly helped me with Spanish, Portuguese, and French, and I know a little Italian, but I don't really use it. It's just for vacation purposes at this point. But for specifically with those languages, I studied Latin at school, and it's funny that you're asking this because I just actually literally today published a LinkedIn newsletter about this topic and what studying and learning and speaking 5.5 languages and studying Latin taught me about leadership and communication. So if you're interested, you can check that out in our audience too. But it's of course, these are related languages, right? Portuguese, French, Spanish, and yet they have very important differences. Lots of false friends, for example, and even the two Portuguese languages that I use, the European Portuguese is very different from the Brazilian Portuguese to a point where Brazilians sometimes have a really hard time understanding European Portuguese in movies, for example, because it's they don't really open the mouth when they speak in some areas. So what was challenging for me was in the beginning, it's always like that, like the jargon, right? To understand people when it's noisy in a noisy environment. Now I'm also getting back into using French more, but I work in English most of the day, so I don't have that much practice. So when I go networking, it's challenging, right? But about learning, what I did is when I studied Spanish, for example, I had already studied French in school before, and English, of course, and Latin. So what I did is I really took newspapers at the time, and I studied outside of my classes that the firm actually paid for just before I moved there. And I made more progress in that sense on my own, and I just really try to get exposure. Today, this is much easier because we have YouTube and all that, so you can, you have all this stuff online that you can watch in different languages, right? But at the time, that was not the case. So that's why I bought newspapers and I studied the vocabulary, the day-to-day vocabulary that we need, because also sometimes in class you don't learn all of that right away. So I believe also you can train your memory in certain ways when you speak or when you learn languages. To me, what's helped me, Fong, is I think I've always questioned the origin of the word. That's been interesting to me. So I sort of remember words in that way as well. Okay, so why is this called this way? If it didn't make any sense, then I would look it up so that I could remember it more easily.
For positioning purposes, when you walk into an organization or to a client and they're, let's say, heavy Spanish or heavy German or heavy whatever language it is, and you know that language, do you upfront tell them, hey, I understand this language, I can speak it, or do you kind of keep quiet until it needs to be shown that you can speak that language?
Well, it depends on the moment, because sometimes, and I get that, because if you want to practice a different language, like if somebody immediately talks to me in English when I want to talk French, then that doesn't allow me to practice, right? So I'm not going to say, oh, you know what, your English is so bad, like indirectly, right? Not in the face, but I cannot, it's better for us to speak a different language. No, I think that would be impolite. But of course, I like to let them know that I speak their language, because that is something we already have in common now. It's a really nice commonality, and if they want to fall back onto into a different language, into the native language, then we can do that. We have the option. So, for example, recently I worked with a client in Mexico, and she wanted to do the coaching in English because she also has to work in English. Okay. But occasionally, like, we would just throw in something in Spanish because we were like, maybe it's sometimes with some clients, I can't remember exactly what it was in her case, but sometimes it's when it's like very deep things, like very personal things, because of course, yes, I do leadership coaching. I do, it's a combination of leadership and career coaching, really, but it's not, life is a holistic phenomenon. Your personal life is not separate from your professional life. And so a lot of that comes into play as well. And sometimes when people talk about those more personal things, they're just more comfortable speaking in their language. So I've definitely also done coaching in Spanish, some in Portuguese with Brazilian clients. And yeah, and I could, of course, do it in German as well, my language.
That's very interesting how you talked about the fact that your work and your life intertwine.
Mhm.
There's so many people out there talking about work-life balance. You have to keep it separated. How does one manage that or balance that so that it's still, yes, it's intertwined, but balanced at the same time.
Yeah, so I'm always saying, what I usually say is my coaching approach is very holistic, right? It's what actually my clients value is my multidisciplinary approach. They sometimes call it multidisciplinary approach in testimonials, right? And you know, I don't use terms like work-life balance. I don't use terms like time management because I love language and I question the words that don't make sense to me. They might make sense to other people. But first of all, work is part of life. You know, it's all part of life. So how would I separate work out of life? It makes no sense. And plus, we will probably never reach exact balance. So that's a myth, right? So what we want to do is we want to manage our priorities. Also not manage time, because time just is, you know, it's not, it doesn't allow itself to be managed, but we can manage our priorities, our activities, our resources within a specific time frame. Yes, that's what we can do. And that's then also less frustrating because it actually works. And when we want to manage time, we're always going to be frustrated. So work-life balance, now I think, you know, our priorities shift over a lifetime. Sometimes work has a bigger weight and sometimes family has a bigger weight. It's different for different people.
Mhm.
Yes, of course, I'm not saying family should be pushed into the background, never. However, you know, there are certain moments in life when maybe we are by ourselves and we give work more importance than other things.
Mhm.
So it depends on what's important to you.
Yeah. And it's amazing how just a simple twist of how to perceive something changes the entire approach as to how you deal with things, from either work-life balance to holistic, being able to prioritize certain activities, and you can't really have balance all the time kind of thing. So once you're able to understand that, it changes the way you approaches your situation or the task or the upcoming vacation or something like that, because you know how to kind of work with the priorities. So that's kind of pretty interesting. Now, something you mentioned before is you're in dance and you're able to now utilize that energy, that feel of dance to also help your clients become better leaders too. How does that work? Because it's usually two separate things. So how do you make dance something that allows people to increase their performance into careers?
Yes. First of all, leaders need to have leadership presence. Yes, or sometimes they call it executive presence, leader presence, business presence. And that really has changed my posture, first of all, okay? Because my posture was much poorer when I did not dance. And I don't even dance as much right now. However, you know, I do dance a few times a week, and it just has changed how I show up. But it also helps us with understanding energy better. How does our energy work, right? So I do both dancing by myself and partner dancing. And in partner dance, I have been known as a great follower. Why is that? Well, because it's easy for me to pick up those little cues of my dance partners. Those signs, you know, your body is emitting, and that happens not just through the body itself, but through the energy. It's all connected, of course, it's not separate, right? Um, and you know, it's not just about this, about rhythm, about steps, about whatever, right? Or about movement. It's also about the intention we are bringing to the dance, about the energy we are bringing to the dance. Because if somebody is not centered in their energy and in their intention, it doesn't feel safe to dance with them. And I don't understand them, because dance is all about nonverbal communication. We're not talking to each other while we're dancing. So we need to communicate on a different level. And if you are not communicating with me through clear intention as a leader in dance, then I cannot follow you. So that's the leader-follower concept, right? The dynamics. So intention is important. Transparency, right? Energy. Your energy flows into everything you think, you say, and you do.
Mhm.
So from your thoughts to your behavior into anything, everything. So that is also something that leaders need to consider and be aware of. We can optimize our energy before we walk into a negotiation, into a team meeting, whatever it is for everybody. And then, of course, there are many other leadership and business lessons that dance has taught me, and I've written about those in articles, also in my LinkedIn newsletter, in my Career Growth Strategies newsletter, for example. There's another thing like, how do you use your space in dance, right? How do you use your space at work, on the stage of work, and or on the dance floor of work? How do you rely on others in your team, like in a dance ensemble? Ensemble means together, right? So in a dance ensemble, how do we interact with each other? How do we support each other? How do we make sure that nobody's hurt? When sometimes we do crazy stuff. I did that in the past, like in Brazil, I did samba de gafieira. We sometimes did turns in the air, and I had to rely on my dance partner to catch me.
Uh-huh.
It's sometimes not necessarily a life or death, but it's sometimes an interesting dynamic that you have to really trust the people you dance with or you work with.
No, there's a lot of people out there who goes, I can't dance. I can't coordinate my hands, my legs don't move the way I want them. What do you tell them? What's your advice for people who don't see dancing in their life, but they realize, wait a minute, if I do implement this in my day-to-day life, it might increase my energy, it might increase my ability to lead better and all that kind of stuff. What's their first step?
Well, first of all, I actually did Howard dancing exercises at events in the past in New York City and in New Jersey at some events. And I remember, some of those were women's events. And so women in our cultures are a little bit more inclined to dance, and in other cultures it's equal, right? But in our cultures, it's just what it is, what I've observed. And so what happened is we did this in a playful way. I guided them from an energy exercise, from an inner power energy exercise into the power posing and then the power dancing, because I love power dancing. Power posing is okay, it's great, it works. But for me, because I love to move, I prefer power dancing. And that's what we did. And a lot of people were hesitant at first, but actually then they got into the groove, because it doesn't matter how you move, it just has to feel good,
Hmm.
And if you do not want to dance at all, that's totally fine, totally fine. Do something that you can, that maybe can help you, feel that expansive feeling rather than the contracted feeling. That's very important. So your posture changes how we show up, right? Our posture changes how we show up in life. And just you can test this and slouch, and then really change your posture, and has an impact on your mind, just like your mind has an impact on your body. So it's a constant exchange. And I believe then when you're more aware, that's already a really big step forward. Look at those amazing people who know how to carry all this weight on their heads in some cultures, right? And what beautiful posture they have from this. Have you observed that?
Oh yeah.
It looks so elegant.
It's like
So
catwalk. They can walk down like models. It's nice.
right, and again, you don't have to walk around with baskets on your head if that's not in your culture or in your interest. But there's so many options. That's just what I want to say, really.
Wow. For people who are shy with the speaking aspect and the dancing aspect, all that kind of stuff, what's one way for people to break out of that comfort zone and attach themselves to challenges and attach themselves to new things. How do you overcome fear of getting out of that shyness space?
Yes, and I want to just give one quick other idea that just came to mind for the previous question. Tai Chi, you know, is another option maybe. Anyway, so yeah, to your question, how do you get over this fear? Well, one thing we already mentioned, it's practice. Of course, you know, through practice, things become easier, like with everything. And then facing fear, because courage is when you face your fear and you do it anyway. Courage is not the absence of fear. And I believe that when we look the fear in the face and we tell it that it's really not about a real risk, a real threat, it's about something different. No, we're not going to be eaten by a tiger or whatever. Then when we rationalize it, that already can help. Doesn't mean that we don't get nervous. I get nervous too. I totally get nervous. I use one of my tools when I get nervous and I rationalize it. And so when we think about it in speaking, for example, to me, it's important when I go in front of an audience that I make a difference for the people that are there. So what's more important? To get that message across and make that difference, maybe change a life or two, or to be in fear and, you know, and not do it. So I think that's a big one for me too. That, okay, I mean, you know what, as speakers, sometimes we've had some experiences that weren't that great. Maybe that was not our ideal audience, but that's also part of it. You know, and just like that is part of it. When you do a presentation in an organization, it's not always going to be perfect. But if you don't start doing it, it's not going to become closer to perfect.
Right. Very, very well said. At the very beginning, you mentioned how you went through lots of ups and downs, lots of high risk, lots of low risk. You've learned lots of lessons. Can you share with us one of the most interesting lesson that you've learned?
Well, there's definitely the experience with my business partner in Brazil, right? Which ended up costing me my business. It's not that he took the entire business, but he was part of the business name also, and that eventually eventually the business became unsustainable, and I just opened it, and I found out about his fraudulent behavior just before the inauguration party, really the launch party, so to speak. So that was a bummer, of course, and eventually I had to sue him and all the not so nice stuff, and it was just not sustainable in terms of the cost that this business had to incur. So I decided to sell the house, okay, because I had actually bought a house and had it built out, a big house, and it was a long process to get all the renovations done and all of that and the build out. So it was very frustrating. It was very sad. I was devastated at the time, however, because gladly I had also been studying holistic methodologies, and I had friends who I'd met through those who helped me with sessions as well. I could eventually overcome. And I think what the most important piece of it was to move out of victim mode and into a more self-empowering mindset. That was really it. Also, I think one important lesson for me was that it's so much harder to forgive yourself oftentimes than to forgive the other person. That was a big challenge for me, to not resent myself.
Wow.
And because we always think, oh, I should have known better. I should have done this differently. I should have, and I could have, but we really couldn't because we didn't know enough at the time. So we need to also make peace with ourselves and realize that at the time we didn't know everything that we know now. In hindsight, it's always easier. And then I have, of course, some very interesting other stories that are more like adventure stories and less sad. But again, you know, we gain growth through those stories, through all of them. And yeah, I think one of them was also when when I moved to Argentina, before this happened, right? That was my first business in Argentina. I again had a brick and mortar business. I left my San Francisco job at the Boston Consulting Group, and I just flew down to open a bed and breakfast in Buenos Aires, and eventually I found myself carrying several $100,000 across the city in my socks because I had to somehow transport my cash to the seller's bank because it had to be done in cash. Like you were literally counting the money there, the dollars at a bank, and that was a very interesting experience. I'm glad it worked fine without incidents. And there's a lot more to that. I also, at some point, lost my money on the internet on the way down there and whatnot. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stories. I've done night bike rides through inner city Johannesburg. I mean, whatever you can imagine. And it's all eventually going to go, hopefully, in my book, soon to be published, soon to be finished.
I can't imagine all that cash in your socks. I'm just picturing this very thin figure, and then once you get to her legs, it's like all bulky all the way down.
And it was hot, it was in Buenos Aires in the summer. It was hot, and you wouldn't usually wear jeans in weather like that, but I had to.
Wow. Um, let's put you back on the world stage, and you get a couple minutes to share with the world a message you want everybody to remember Regina for. What would that message be?
Yes, one thing is everything I do is in the service of freedom. As my book title says, the book that I already have, the freedom to speak up, stand out, and shine. Everybody should have that freedom. And the other thing is that no one can empower you but yourself. We use this word empower, as I said earlier, question words, right? We use this so often. It's, oh, I empower you to do this. I empower you to do that. But do we really? Because the power is already inside of the people. We can guide them to empower themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think I can empower anybody, frankly. So I always say this to people because it actually helps them to realize what tremendous power is inside of them. Nobody needs to place it into you. It's already there.
Nicely said. Good, great words to live by. Before I let you go, I got 5 quick rapid fire questions for you. Give me the first things that come to mind.
Okay.
The first one, stranded on the desert island, one food to eat for the rest of your life, no consequence.
Sorry, can you repeat that? I couldn't hear.
One food to eat for the rest of your life, no consequence.
Oh, one fruit. Strawberries.
I was like, papaya, no, strawberries.
It's so many choices.
Hollywood calls and goes, Regina, we love your story. It's so inspirational. Who would you like to be casted to play you?
Oh, wow. I think I would like to be you know what? Nobody famous. I would like to find that person in my travels.
Awesome.
Somebody I meet that I really connect with.
Okay, so you sat there, you had a whole bunch of people come through, uh, and go through the rehearsals and try on the auditions and stuff like that. You pick your Regina, and she shows up and goes, "Okay, I want to learn more about you. I want to get to know you more and all that kind of stuff." And he goes, "Future Regina, no problem. Let's head out. I got the whole night planned out. What does that night look like?"
We're gonna go dancing, no question.
All right.
African dancing, if possible.
Now she's hungry. You go, don't worry about that either. I got that covered. What's that special dish that you could whip up?
I would make a very spicy Thai green curry with shrimp.
Very nice. And my last question before I get there, give me a number from 1 to 4.
3.
1, 2, 3. So Kit Kat bar. So how is success like a Kit Kat bar? Using
It
Kit
has
Kat
two
as
sides.
okay,
It
go.
has two sides because it has it has two sides. Just like your distinctive uniqueness has two sides. It has the shadow and the sunny side.
Nicely done. So that's how success is like a Kit Kat bar. Thank you very much for all your time and your stories, your wisdom. What's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
My website is transformyourperformance.com, just like my company name, transformyourperformance.com. I'm on LinkedIn as Regina Huber. I'm on YouTube as @Regina Huber. My book is on Amazon, Speak Up, Stand Out, and Shine, Kindle or print. And I'm on Facebook as Regina Huber. I think that's it.
Awesome. Any final words from
Instagram too, but
any final words?
Sorry?
Any final words from you?
Oh, any final words? Well, thank you so much for having me on. This has been such a wonderful exchange, fun conversation. I do hope that it's also been valuable for our listeners because that's what it's all about.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. For everyone, make sure you connect with Regina. I'm sure if you want to ask stuff about dance, she can also help you out with that too. Or maybe meet up with her and go dancing sometime. So
Yeah.
get connected with Regina. Until next
Happy
time,
to.
she's Regina. My name's Fong. Today is Day to Lock Your Peak Potential. We'll see you later.